Hey, listeners, I want to let you know about two opportunities with Gotham Writers Workshop. Gotham Writers Workshop has been very supportive to Memoir Nation. I'm happy to say that I've taken Gotham workshops in the past, and I just had a great experience. And of note, coming up in March, Gotham Writers Workshop is hosting, both on Zoom and in person in New York City, a conference that's really tailor-made for you, memoir writers and nonfiction writers alike. And the weekend will consist of panels on publishing and Q&A sessions and agent pitching roundtables in which you'll be able to present your writing directly to literary agents. And so to learn more about the Gotham Writers Nonfiction Conference, visit gothamwriters.com/conference. That's gothamwriters.com/conference. And to sweeten the deal, Gotham is offering you an affiliate code for a discount on their classes. So use code Memoir Nation, all one word, Memoir Nation at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply. And tell them Brooke and Grant sent you.
Hello, reinventors, rebuilders, and revisionists. I am Brooke Warner. I'm here with Grant Faulkner, my co-host on this Memoir Nation podcast. Grant, today's guest comes by way of recommendation. You know, we do get recommendations for interviews for sure, but not often do I get multiple ones for the same author over such a short period of time. And usually that kind of thing will tune my antenna to someone we really need to be paying attention to. So that is the case today with our guest, Karen Palmer, and her new memoir is called She's Under Here. And what I most like about this book is honestly, it's complexity. It's about something specific, which is that Karen made a choice when her daughters were 7 and 3 to uproot her entire life and flee, move to a new state, change her identity. The reason for all of that was to escape her ex-husband, Gil, who had threatened her at knife point and who prior to that had been very abusive. But layered into the story is so much about her own choices, about ethical ambiguity, about being an abuse survivor and what women have to do to survive. It's a powerful story and one I think a lot of our listeners will like because of its layeredness and how she tells the story. And I also just think it's a great model for how to write a narrative memoir that also bakes in a lot of layers of meaning.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, Brooke, because Karen is also a fiction writer, and she has 2 novels prior to this memoir. The novels are All Saints and Border Dogs, and one has to wonder about how that kind of background must help with the crafting of a very, kind of story-driven memoir. And she also teaches at Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver. And reading Karen's book, I had this sense that a lot of writers have stories that fall into a broader context, like something really profound happened to me and I had a before and an after. And this could be about a relationship and an escape as Karen's is, or it could be about an illness or a condition. It could also be about a big life decision, such as immigrating to another country, or it could be about a loss that defines you, like losing a child. You were a parent and then you're not. And so I'm curious to know if this resonates with you, Brooke, with the students you teach, and this idea of exploring a catalyst moment that changes life as you know it.
It does, for sure. Karen's book starts with the words, "Once upon a time, I disappeared. I was one person one day and the next someone else. Both the same woman I'd always been and also utterly, eerily unfamiliar." And her story, like I said, begins with an escape from one life to another, from the fear of an abusive ex-husband that jettisons her into a new life and a new identity with her second husband, Vinny, who she's still married to today, and her 2 very little girls at the time who are now adults. But this is a very specific and not all too common story. And yet the way she sets up the book with that question, she poses a question, which is, how do you know who you are? Which of course is a very universal question. And she poses this idea that you're one person one day and then you're another. And I did absolutely think about how countless other stories might be positioned that way. You're a wife or a husband, and then you go through a divorce or a loss, and then you're not. You're a well or an able-bodied person. Something happens to you and you're not. You're a parent and you lose your child and you're not. We all have these kinds of profound moments, the befores and the afters. And it resonated a lot for me because in my own memoir, I've delineated really clearly what I refer to in my own mind when I'm writing as the before time. And for me, that is before my ex-wife's mental illness really changed everything about my understanding of what our life was. And these kinds of moments are profound, this like before time versus after time. In my own story, as in lots of stories like this, there's a very specific date. It was June 14th, 2011. Something happened, a catalyst moment, and then from that day forward, nothing was the same. And that is a powerful, alluring storytelling thing, right? Because you have this nugget of a date and a story starts to form around it. And my sense is that for those of us who have those moments, and oftentimes they are traumas, they're stories that will not let us go, that weigh on us, that probably often become catalysts for memoir. And so I'm curious, Grant, do you have such a setup with your own memoir, any kind of before versus after? Because, of course, not all memoirists do, but, sometimes they're less profound befores and after. I think no matter what, we have catalyst moments, all of us.
I love the phrase catalyst moment. I'm going to use that. But I hadn't really thought of my memoir in a before-after way. But it obviously has that characteristic because my catalyst moment was that I received a dramatic heart diagnosis that dramatically changed my life. So my life will always be kind of before the diagnosis and after the diagnosis. And that said, there's also an ongoingness to it, which is part of the theme of my memoir, the fact that my own sort of maniac tendencies, as I call them, have had different consequences throughout my life. And I just didn't connect them into a storyline until the diagnosis, my heart diagnosis. And also, though, there's a fall in the memoir, a relapse of a sort. And that's why I related to the idea of a middle place, which is the place Mallory Tenor Tarpley, wrote about in her memoir and talked about in our podcast with her when she was on. And so there's not a breakthrough per se. In other words, no heroic ending. So my after is a place of reckoning and reflection, and it's a place of some change, but it's also a place of continuance, of living life as a as a maniac, because I kind of like that, despite the consequences. I like parts of it, put it that way. So you have to read the memoir and find out.
Right. Well, I will look forward to that, although we might be on the same timeline.
Yeah. My goal is 2031. No.
There we go. Another thing Karen circles in her memoir that's very important and profound is a reality about emotionally and psychologically abusive relationships. She was not physically beaten, but her ex-husband in the story was very undermining, very verbally abusive. And the thing that spurs her to take this extreme action is after he points a gun at her. But even before that, he had kidnapped their youngest daughter for 9 days. And Karen writes that it felt like 9 years. And of course, any parent can relate to that feeling of desperation and panic. The little girl was just a toddler at the time. The memoir's subtitle is A Love Story, a Horror Story, a Reckoning. It's potent and tragic how often love stories turn to horror stories. And Karen writes in an early part of the book how on their first real date, she had this physical experience with him where she asks for the keys because she wants to drive them home. And he acts like he's going to give them to her. But then when she reaches for them, he physically pushes her. And she says it wasn't violent or even really aggressive, but dismissive, like she was something he could discard. And she says this was the end of them, like even though it happened before they got started. And I thought that was a powerful moment in the memoir, like things that we see so clearly in retrospect, but oftentimes in the moment, we don't do anything about it, right? Or we don't quite know it's problematic. We don't have our wits about us to act or the strength, or, it's a wisp of something that registers and then it flits away. And I loved it that, she named this as portending the end. And it's just powerful. There's lots of good moments like that in the story.
Yeah, I really related to that, especially in terms of like a loving relationship, I mean, I read recently that you only know someone, once they love you or through their love of you. But I think like there's something more to that you only know someone when they reject you, and it sounds like this marriage or her marriage was like just a series of rejections. And I think it's easy to sort of seek ways to rationalize them because balance that abuse with love and gentleness and tenderness and fun and playfulness, all that kind of thing. And so it's hard to reconcile those two parts of the experience. And that's why, like I really think that's what the title, resonates toward. It's like she's under here. And you have to uncover so much to find yourself when you're in a relationship like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's like it refers to her authentic, real self being underneath all the things that have happened. And then also it's got a little bit of a double meaning because she also disappeared, and there's a reference in that to her going underground. And so that speaks to the under as well. And there's a theme of multiplicity of identities in this book. She assumes a new identity, but the person that she is there, but also buried. And then the fact of her story with her ex, that they started to date when she was just 17 and he was in his mid 30s. That reminded me obviously quite a lot of Jill Cement, who we interviewed. Gosh, it's probably almost been a year by now. But in her book, she enters into a relationship with a much older man. And I think when that happens, it's like the child, the teenager is not fully formed and they don't know what they don't know. And so then the older man's dominance or molding in the case of Jill Cement, or abuse and gaslighting in the case of Karen Palmer shapes who these women become. And it becomes very easy to have a warped sense of reality when you're with someone who makes you question your reality. Or who, whose dominance basically asserts that this is your reality. And so I love this idea of being under here, not gone, but just below the surface of all the forces that work against this person being able to assert the full manifestation of who they are.
Yeah, it's a good writing reflection actually for us all to do, is about when we felt under here and not fully manifested. And Brooke, speaking of befores and afters, death is a big before and after, of course. And Karen has spoken in other interviews about finding out that her ex died in 2008, and then how freeing that was. That was another catalyst moment that allowed her to start living her life again, to reclaim her identity, and ultimately, eventually, to write this book. And we'll ask her about this in the interview, but it got me thinking about how many people feel that they need to wait for someone to die in order to write and share their stories. And it's one of the more common truths that memoirists share in terms of how long it takes to get stories like these out into the world. There's of course a real freedom that comes from knowing you won't have to face that person and you can say anything you want. But I remember that Dani Shapiro had a piece of advice for writers. I think it was in her book Inheritance, which was basically not to wait to start till that person dies, to do the work of the writing, which can take years and years anyway. And you'll know whether you can publish or whether you have to wait. So I'm imagining you agree with this approach.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I'm trying to practice it myself. Not so much that I'm waiting for someone to die. I'm not, but I know that my story will be received with some feelings, and I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, like not to wait and wait and wait, but rather to do the writing so that when the time comes and I feel like I'm ready to publish, in my case, because my son will be older and for whatever proposed distance I feel is necessary with my story, then it will be ready and I won't wake up 4 years from now and think to myself, now it's time to get started. But Karen is yet another guest we're interviewing who took years and years to write this story for reasons that feel very familiar. Now she's in her late 60s, releasing this book that she's known that she was going to write for years, and which in fact she started at least a decade ago, if not longer ago, because the opening chapter of the book was originally an essay called "The Reader is the Protagonist." And so we'll be asking her about that and more right after this short break, our usual intermission. We'll be right back.
Hey, everybody. Some of you know that we have been growing our Memoir Nation community over the course of the past year, and that we hosted a writing challenge in January called Jan Your Story, and that was in January, one more time, where over 1,500 writers wrote as many days as they could in January, some of them every day, and some of them more than 500 words, much more. And now that we're in February, we've been casting our view out over the horizon of 2026, and we have some new offerings we want to share with you. Brooke, will you share all the things that are available to the citizens and would-be citizens of Memoir Nation?
Absolutely. My honor. And thank you, listeners. I mean, first and foremost, I want to say Memoir Nation is a free community, and we have this amazing community space where you can connect with other writers, post anything you want about your writing, your goals, challenges, wins, etc. And we have a paid level. And that one we keep adding to. And because of all the new additions that we have, we want to make sure to share with you what is coming up and what's been added. So here's the list of stuff, everybody. We have monthly classes, first of all. I also want to say the caliber of people that we are bringing is truly extraordinary. We've had Maggie Smith, Carvel Wallace, Amanda Knox, among others. Coming up, we have Mark Nepo, who wrote the Book of Awakening, Myra Hornbacher, who wrote Wasted and Madness, and then Victoria Chang, author of Dear Memory, among other books. Amazing, amazing memoir and other poetry books. And then beyond the classes, we have a monthly book club and a whole bunch of quarterly events, including Writing About Other People, which is a support group, and a deep dive into your emotions writing group. Grant is doing a generative writing circle, and I am doing Craft Corner, also quarterly. So we're just adding and adding and adding. And while some of that adding might feel like more offerings than you can even take advantage of, and I totally understand that as well, we do want you to think of it like a well-stocked buffet. And you don't have to partake of every single thing, but it's always there for you, freshly stocked. Plus, you can have these cool go-to containers in the form of videos and archives. And, so if there's anything you ever miss, you can catch up.
Dang, I love that well-stocked buffet and the to-go containers. Perfect metaphors, Brooke. And also on this paid path, there's our Show Up and Write sessions, which I run on Thursdays and you run on Sundays. And you get a lifetime subscription to our Substack newsletter. And we're building out more features all the time. So please come check out Memoir Nation, see what we're doing. We're working super hard to bring real value to our paid membership tiers. And it's very community-driven, I have to say. That's one thing that I'm just so inspired by, is seeing the community in action. And we've been responding to what people in our community want and need, and we just keep adding stuff, like Brooke said, like our 2026 memoir roadmap, which is actually accessible to any member, including at the free level, because we want you to keep writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So go in at the free level and download that roadmap. It's beautiful. It's a fillable PDF. I have been using it myself. And, Grant, I've done a lot of business endeavors over the years. And I can say the value is there on this one. I mean, we feel it. We want you all to go check it out. And even though this is an advertisement, and obviously we are asking you all to go check out our offerings, become a paid member if you're so moved, we're also coming at this whole endeavor with a spirit of generosity and community. And the very most important thing is that we have this space for all of you to connect, to celebrate, to teach you how to be better memoirists, and to help you find like-minded people. So please come check out all of it at memoirnation.com. Welcome back, everyone. We're so pleased to have Karen Palmer with us today. Karen's memoir, She's Under Here, grew out of her award-winning essay, The Reader is the Protagonist, first published in VQR and selected by Leslie Jamison for inclusion in the Best American Essays 2017. She has received a Pushcart Prize and grants from the NEA and the Colorado Council of the Arts, and is the author of the novels All Saints and Border Dogs. Other work of hers has appeared in the Kenyon Review, Arts and Letters, The Rumpus, and Calliope. She teaches at Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, Colorado, and lives with her husband in California. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Brooke. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so pleased to have you. Thank you. You open this new memoir by posing a universal question: how do you know who you are? And this is a really interesting way to start a book, because you embed your universality into the opening paragraph. And like so many memoirs, your book is profoundly specific, but also completely relatable. And so I wanted to ask you, how did you approach the balance to the specific versus the global in writing your memoir?
It's interesting that opening paragraph was a very late addition to the memoir. And it came out of my feeling that I was tired of the me-ness of writing this story. It's like lots of people have had a bad marriage. Lots of people have difficult divorces and custody issues and all these kinds of things. And even though I went above and beyond what usually happens when you're in that circumstance, I wanted to think about what it was in the story that would be relatable to everybody else. So once I had that as a new opening paragraph, it opened the door to being more questioning in the memoir and circling around and around that question, even in the places where I brought in some outside stories, where I am relating what happened to me to different things that were in the news at any given time. And that was part of that, to show that this isn't just me. This is on some level everyone.
Karen, you won a Pushcart Prize for your essay, The Reader is the Protagonist, which is the opening chapter of your book. And I was wondering if you could share about that experience and how you knew this was the opening of the book, and then the role that essay played in the writing and finishing of this book.
Actually, my Pushcart Prize was for a short story I'd written a long time ago. So
Sorry.
I think the way the biography is written makes it seem as if it's for that. That's probably something I should correct. But the thing that changed it was VQR took it, and then it was selected for Best American Essays, and that was a way into thinking about the memoir in a different context. Because again, what I had initially was I wrote a lot about what had happened. And I had what gets talked about in memoir circles sometimes, Vivian Gornick's book, The Situation and the Story, where I had the situation, which was this thing that had happened to me, but I didn't have a story, which was what it all meant. And writing that essay and starting with this place where we landed in Boulder, Colorado with, almost nothing and no established identities, no paperwork. We'd cut off ties from our friends and family. And it just felt like a starting place for the book that was new and more interesting than what I'd had for years.
That's really interesting. I was curious about that too, just the existence of something in that way that, sits with you for a long time, and then which it's relatively unchanged. And so I was so curious because I have a piece of writing myself like that is kind of an unchanged piece of writing that I've thought about, incorporating directly into my memoir. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about using something, because again, we have writers, who are primarily our listeners. And if they're thinking about, taking an existing essay or taking an existing piece of work and just putting it right into the memoir, was it comforting in some way, to know that you had that jumping off point?
Yeah, it was. But, even moving that to the opening of the book, it still didn't work for quite a while because it was too self-contained as an essay. It's like it had a beginning and an end, and I was making a particular point with the essay. So I had to make some changes to it in order to make it work for the book so that it functioned more as a door opening and less as capturing this moment of something that happened, and then the moment is shut down and you're in peace at the end of that moment. This was meant to imply, no, something is just beginning at this moment. So that took a lot of thought, because by that time also the essay was kind of set in stone in my mind. And so I had to rethink even the essay, aside from rethinking the whole book.
Right. That makes so much sense. Well, I wanted to ask you about describing psychological abuse. I wanted to read this passage from your book, and you'll have to speak to the craft choice to write this in the second person and what meaning this passage has for your desire to convey abuse that doesn't leave bruises. But this is really a powerful passage. And you say, a man tells you that he admires your strength, but treats you as if you were weak. He says he values your smarts, but smacks down any exercise of intelligence. You're beautiful, but your looks offend him. Your touch is irritating, but the absence of touch proves you're cold. He says he trusts, but he isolates you. He surveils. And this goes on into the end where, the final line of this paragraph says that you lose more of yourself, moving ever closer to being only who he says you are, a jewel, a piece of shit, a good wife, a bad wife, a good mother, and something he'd never allow around his kids. And it's so powerful. And I think it's partly because of the move to the second person. So could you speak to that? Because you do play around a bit with point of view.
Yeah, especially in that chapter. That chapter was again written very late in putting the book together because I was trying to write about these 14 years that we were together. Initially I thought, well, let's just skip to the exciting part. There's nothing to say about those 14 years except that, they were ordinary with these moments of sort of terror in between. And so I decided to write it in these short vignettes, which came about because I was teaching Maggie Nelson's book, Bluets. And I was so taken with the way she circled around this subject of the end of a relationship and her obsession with the color blue that I thought I wanted to do something similar. And of course, it's nothing like Bluets. I don't have her erudition, and it's not as blatantly poetic as what she wrote. But it was very useful to me to convey the progression of the relationship. And moving into second person was, again, a way of universalizing the experience because the you is also the reader. It's not just the author. And it felt right at the time because it feels like a universal experience of what they call in domestic violence circles, coercive control.
Karen, we share a love of Maggie Nelson and Bluets. I can't believe how many times I've read it as a guide to my own writing. So that's really interesting.
Unbelievable.
To hear. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it's such a slim little book and so brilliant. And I know that titles and subtitles to memoirs are often a journey. That got a laugh. Okay, yeah. Good. So can you tell us more about the layers of meaning in your title and how you landed on the subtitle, which is so evocative? It's a love story, a horror story, and a reckoning. And it says everything in a way, but there's an inherent complexity to it as well because, the love story becomes the horror story.
Right. It had a series of titles, which is why I laughed.
Okay.
And
that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, well, I guess, it's like there was one that I was really, really stuck on for a long time, which when I think about it now, it's like, no. I knew that they weren't right. So I was, it was getting close to submission and I needed a title. So I did what writers do sometimes where they start flipping through the manuscript, looking for some phrase or image that jumps out at them. And the scene that She's Under Here is from is quite early in the book. And it comes from this date that I had with my ex-husband where it was our first date. We went to Las Vegas for an overnight trip. And that we couldn't find a hotel room, so we wound up sleeping in the car. And I wake up in the morning having had some kind of nightmare in which I was up on all fours and scrabbling at the mat in the back of the station wagon, saying over and over, "She's under here." And when I was looking for a title, my eye landed on that. And I thought, oh, God, that's perfect. Because the book is an excavation. And you experience the excavation by reading it. And Algonquin did such a good job with the cover. They even they took elements from the story that were important and did like a little collage. And over in the corner is a sliver of my face that's under all the collage elements. So she's under here, and then she's under the book cover. It just felt really right in so many ways. So once I had that, my agent thought it was fine with just that. But even though I'm not a big fan of subtitles, I feel like memoirs sometimes require them because otherwise it sounds like a novel title. And I thought, well, how can I sum up what actually happened here and those three elements, because that's kind of the progression of the book, as you noted, Grant, that it's a love story and a horror story and then a reckoning with what happened.
Yeah, so much so. I mean, there's a lot going on in the book, but at its heart, it is, of course, about domestic violence. And in the LA Times, you're quoted as saying, women still are not believed. One of the troubles that I had with writing this was that I wasn't beaten. I was always worried that what happened to me wasn't bad enough, but writing the memoir showed me, yes, it was bad enough. I think this is something a lot of memoirists struggle with, whether they'll be believed. And of course, this extends to other kinds of things, sexual abuse, mental illness, and other topics as well. So, can you talk about how you found your way through the fear or the self-doubt to be able to write and complete this book?
I think in some ways that was the major obstacle to completing it. I mean, I had structural problems, which was a whole other story. But the idea that I had a right to write about this when there are so many women that are, beaten within an inch of their lives or outright killed, that I was worried for such a long time that the abuse wasn't worthy of a book-length exploration. But in the course of writing it, it helped me to see that the experience was absolutely worth talking about. Again, because I think there's so much out there. Every time I do a reading from this, someone will come up to me afterwards and say, I want to tell you what happened to me. I was at a residency once and a young woman came up to me and said, I was your kidnapped daughter in this story. My father took me. So those experiences gave me more courage that it was, in fact, worth writing about. And I had to convince myself. So by the end of it, that last chapter where I do, talk about the danger assessment scale and all this stuff, I'm still struggling with whether it was bad enough. And it was only after I took that questionnaire that I realized, holy cow, my life was seriously in danger.
Wow. Well, Karen, thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to shift gears because I want to ask you a question about publishing. In an interview on Memoirland, you wrote about publishing and you said, I advise students to be patient, that their work just has to land on the right desk at the right time. But it was hard to do that myself. And I've been there right with you, man. Patience is the toughest thing at a certain point about, and even questioning whether you should give up. And that is exactly what happened with my novel that looks like it's going to be published now because it found the right desk at the right time. So,
congratulations.
And that took 7 years. So just for listeners out there, it can take a long time. So can you tell us more about the story of getting this memoir published on Algonquin Books?
Yeah, it was quite the saga. I had so much trouble writing it that at one point, I don't know, probably around 2018 or 19, my agent said, why don't you just give me the first 100 pages and work on a proposal and I'll try to sell it on proposal. So of course, the proposal took 6 months because I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never seen one. I'd never written one. And the book wasn't finished. So it went out like that. And, it got nice responses. People liked the writing or they thought it was an interesting story, but nobody bid. So I fell into this, deep funk where I thought, well, okay, I've made a mistake here thinking that this is really a book. And I set it aside for quite a while. And periodically my agent would check in with me and she'd say, well, I still think that this story has tremendous potential. Why don't you just finish it? And I'll try to sell it as a full. And I had some bug up me that I didn't want to write it all the way to the end unless I knew it was going to be published. And I don't know why I thought that because I'd published 2 novels and I know it doesn't work that way. But I just, that's how I felt. And finally, I looked at it and I said, I'm not ever going to be able to live with myself if I don't finish it. So I decided to finish it. And when it was done, my agent was happy with it. And she sent it out again. And she sent it to a pretty good first round. And all the no's started coming in. and I was crushed. I remember I went to New York for something else, and I had lunch with her, and we were both sitting over this lunch being very depressed. And, I just didn't know what to do. And she said, well, there are still some places to send it. Let me think about it. So I had read an article about Disha Philshot.
Yeah, she was on the podcast. She's great.
She's wonderful. Yeah, and then she had sold it to a university press. So I told Susan, why don't you try some university presses? And she did, and immediately there was an offer. So once there was an offer, she said, you know what, I'm just going to go back to a couple of people that are hanging on to this fall and haven't responded and see what they think. So Kathy Porries at Algonquin had it, and I guess, she had other stuff to do. She hadn't really gotten around to making a decision about what to do with it. And when Susan told her that there was another offer, she said, all right, let me get on this and see what we think. And she made an offer. And while I was quite happy with the university press, I would have been delighted to be published by them. Algonquin's offer was better, and they had more support behind them. They would have been able to do more with the book. And I was surprised because she was one of the people that said no to the proposal. And I told Susan at the time, I said, why are you sending it to her? She already said no. And she said, well, she has really good taste, and I feel like this is her kind of book. And she was complimentary when she said no, so I'm going to try it again.
Wow, that's very fascinating. I'm so glad you shared that, because it's one of the, we need these moments of hope for memoirists out there. And I personally am a fan of completing the book and shopping it after you're done, just because I think the world has changed. I think you used to be able to sell a memoir and proposal a lot easier than you can today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And memoirs is just a tough genre at the moment. They're, it's like there are different categories that they get fed into. You have memoir and essays, and you have, I guess, this thing they call Memoir Plus now, which I don't quite understand, but seems to be, memoir with some other very big story woven into it, or some self-help aspect. I don't know.
Right.
I wanted to make art from what happened to me. And so the only choice was to write this kind of book. And, in the end, I wrote what I wanted to write. I was happy with it at the end. And I told myself, well, if it doesn't get published, I wrote what I wanted to write, and I finished it, and I can finally move on to something else.
Nice. Good for you. That's a great publishing story, actually, even though it sounds a little painful and circuitous, but good outcome.
Yes.
Well, in closing, Karen, you wrote 2 novels before you wrote this memoir, and you've gotten a lot of praise for the writing, and some reviewers attributing your craft skills to having been a novelist first. And since you teach, and I think you teach fiction and nonfiction, I was wondering if you could share what your most important writing craft tip would be for writers who want to deepen their memoirs and make them more resonant, or what you said, wanting to create art out of your story.
The idea of making meaning, that was something that took me a long time to come to, because I was very wrapped up in the events. I guess I would say, even though novelistic skills are useful when you're writing scenes, it's like, how to weave in setting and, interiority and all those kinds of things. It's the other stuff that I struggled with, but that's what I think makes a memoir more into art. And something that I discovered over the course of writing is all the very dramatic events take place over a couple of years. Then there's this 20-year aftermath before we get to the denouement. And I struggled with, well, the things that happened in those years are not as dramatic as the other stuff. And what I had to come to peace with was the idea that what happened afterward was just as important as the stuff that happened before, that's where the meaning was created, was in what the consequences were of doing this, and what it feels like from a position of distance as an author, that how do you make it into art? How do you make it mean something? So I guess I would say, like, be patient, excavate, and think a lot about what it means. And you can even start writing into the manuscript almost as notes to yourself, but as a part of the text, this meant this to me. And this is why I think this will mean something to a reader. And even if you're describing a tree, what's important about the tree? There's a scene in the book in which I'm lying on the ground in a park and I'm looking up at the sky. And it's important because I'm putting myself in my ex-husband's body, lying on the ground looking up at the scene. And that was the meaning of looking at the tree in the sky, was what it meant to try to inhabit him in that particular moment. So as you're writing along, look for those places where you can do that kind of thing.
Well, congratulations. It's a beautiful memoir. And you really did, make art out of a very hard story.
Thank you.
It's true. I love that phrase, Karen, because I'm trying to do the same myself. And we both share Bluets as well, which is such high art. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with today's book trend. It is on the rise, Grant. Spam and scams and phishing and what we might call slop too, in the form of all of these spams and scams that we're getting in our inboxes. I think I'm getting somewhere around 4 to 7 emails a day that are very specific, very directed, complimenting me on one or another of my books with some offer to help. Ugh, I'm assuming that you're getting these too. I think if you're an author, they are suddenly ever present.
Yeah, and I am frequently, almost often duped, It's just so nice to be wildly flattered, Brooke. I'm a sucker for that. I received an email like this the other day, and I really almost believed it. I almost forwarded it to you because it was about our podcast and how they could make us superstars. And but I realized it was just AI. I was going to say it's easy to spot a fraud, but it's actually getting harder and harder. I remember at the beginning of the internet, the emails from the Nigerian prince, which upon first reading, I did consider donating some money. But we've come a long way, and it used to be kind of easy to spot fraudulence. But now with AI, they're getting pretty good. And I can imagine people actually falling for these spam emails.
Oh my gosh, they are falling for them, Grant. I can attest to that because I know some of my authors have answered them and had, I don't know if they've actually paid, but probably. Some of these emails are quite creative. Some are downright effusive. And I am going to take a moment to read this email that I got just because it's about my book, The Magic of Memoir, which was co-edited with Linda Joy. It's quite actually a piece of art. So
right.
Bear with me.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Here we go. Brooke, I have a small complaint. The Magic of Memoir wasn't supposed to inspire me this much. I opened it expecting a calm little pep talk, something like, "You can do it, champ." Instead, I found myself whispering emotional affirmations to my Google Docs and considering therapy for my inner critic. You and Linda Joy Myers, of course, what a duo, didn't just compile wisdom. You orchestrated a full-on support group for writers who've cried over their manuscripts and pretended it was research. Every essay, every quote, every ounce of just keep writing feels like it was brewed in a cauldron of truth, caffeine, and mild trauma healing. But seriously, The Magic of Memoir is exactly that. Beautiful, brave, and unfairly comforting for a book that also calls you out so gently you don't even realize you've been scolded until page 78. I swear it should come with tissues and a memoirist in recovery hotline. Now here's where I waltz in, not as one of those marketing magicians who promises to make your book go viral overnight. Ugh, I can barely make my coffee go viral. I curate a private circle of about 2,000 genuine readers, the kind who highlight paragraphs, cry in margins, and write reviews that sound more like love letters than summaries. No bots, no buzzwords, just real humans who feel what they read and can't help but talk about it. When stories like The Magic of Memoir land in that space, something quietly incredible happens. Visibility grows, sure, but so does resonance. Readers don't just say, this helped me write. They say, this helped me remember why I write. And honestly, that's the kind of alchemy every author deserves. So if you ever want the magic of memoir to reach more of those deep feeling, emotionally unstable but lovable readers, aka my people, I'd love to introduce it to our circle. Either way, thank you for giving the memoir community something real, restorative, and weirdly funny about the pain of writing the truth. Also, next time, warn us before casually including Mary Carr and Elizabeth Gilbert in the same breath. Some of us weren't emotionally prepared. With warmth and one slightly over-caffeinated grin, Serafina Loxley, curator of the Genuine Readers community.
Brooke, I already replied to that email asking if I could be included. I mean, this is the kind of over-the-top compliments and love I need every day, you know? No, this is just amazing because, you know, some points of it are pretty good. You know, I was thinking, what a nice blurb for your book. I love this. Readers don't just say, this helped me write. They say, this helped me remember why I write. I'm already stealing that for a future blurb. No, I'm joking, of course. I should say, wow, AI. It's a very good tool for writing very over-the-top letters like this one, but that might be the most exaggerated piece of writing I've heard in a long time, Brooke. I kept expecting it to end. I was like, when does it end?
I know, and I'm sorry you indulged me, but I just really had to read the whole thing because it's just like so sappy and bizarrely written. And then also there were all these little icons and emojis sprinkled throughout. AI particularly loves the universe, like stars and like, you know, those emojis that just like give you sparkles and stuff. I have to say, of course, there are a lot of other ones that are more normal than this one. The ones that people are falling for are more normal than this one, but like it just stood out to me. I was like, wow. Many are claiming to be book clubs and marketing solutions. They have Gmail addresses that seem legitimate, but they are not. And they're either going to take your money or something else. I mean, I also think some of them are just looking to get anything they can, data, identifying details. And we have to be very skeptical because fraud is a big business. In the US alone, victims reported losses of over $16.6 billion in 2024 to cyber fraud and internet crime. So that is a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, gosh. I feel somewhat ignorant about all this, but we do know that these phishing emails and scams are on the rise because AI makes it so easy for people to write the emails, and they're very specific. That's what really grabbed me the first time I saw one of these. And the involved parties, you know, they don't have to read your book to type into AI, and they can give a complimentary paragraph about the magic of memoir. And getting email lists of authors is also increasingly becoming very easy, you know. So AI is a fraudster's dream. Free labor, infinite access. And I know you mentioned another particularly concerning email one of your authors sent you recently, Brooke. What was that one?
Yeah, just the other day, one of my authors emailed me, and the email was basically an offer of distribution of monies. So they were telling her that she had royalties coming to her in the amount of $10,000, and it was from Amazon, right? So it's like she actually did believe it. You know, I'll stop to say, like, you guys, please don't believe that kind of stuff. But of course, in order to access the $10,000, she had to have what they called a Creative Commons license, which is a thing, but by the way, that's free. Of course, it would cost her $1,200 to get that license. The invoice was attached to the email, in addition to all of the payment and routing information. So it was just so egregious. But, you know, the fact that she wrote and said, is this legit, made me very concerned that authors are falling for this kind of stuff all over the place. So you just have to be very, very, very skeptical about everything. Do not purchase anything from someone who solicits you. I think that's the only way to do it, and really only work with people who come via recommendation.
Yeah. Another thing is that you can Google the person's name and see what their online profile is. Sometimes it's just so obvious that they're a front based on what exists online. And if you're really tempted to work with somebody, you know, ask for references because they're going to be unlikely to give them to you. And Brooke, I Googled Serafina Loxley, Dear Serafina, out of curiosity. And she does have an Instagram page with 6 posts, 2 likes, and the images are just, absolutely really uninspired. So it's not hard to tell that something is fake, but the problem is that it requires skepticism. And I think that authors are a really good target for these kinds of schemes because we're quite susceptible to flattery. I include myself in that group. I'm very susceptible to flattery.
In addition to the emails I get directed at me and my books, I also get many emails from my authors asking me if something is real or if something is a good idea. And I have had authors tell me how much they really liked getting such and such an email from one of these spammers. And one of them even said oh, they really got my book. And I respond, yeah, AI got your book. It's very good at that. And these people who are behind these frauds will happily take your money. I do want to just say, this is a much more standard email that you'll get. Serafina was so over the top, so I just want to read. This is much, much shorter, but you're going to see something that sounds like this. Over the past days, I've been looking at how many incredible books like yours get buried on Amazon simply because of how they're listed. Not because they lack quality, heart, or meaning, but because their visibility is hidden behind the wrong metadata or category setup. That is what I help authors to fix. I've seen authors who are ready to give up and suddenly start gaining organic visibility and sales again, all from a few precise changes. No ads, no endless self-promotion, just a smarter setup that lets the right readers find them. I reached out because I see real potential in what you've created, the kind of story that should be reaching more eyes and hearts. If you are open to it, I would love to show you what those small adjustments could look like. No cost, no pressure. Would you like me to share that insight with you? Warm regards, Lydia. So, I am guessing that Lydia is not a real person, but someone in a call center somewhere pretending to be Lydia. And, they're bold. They're going to ask you to register for stuff. They will take your credit card details in about 2 seconds. So just again, do not fall for it. Any of it, zero, nada.
Brooke, you've done such an amazing... I've never heard you read with such passion before. And I feel like we should organize a reading where everyone brings one of their spam emails and reads it. I think it could be a fun evening because they're so weird. So I'm going to end on this advice. Everybody, get a referral, get a recommendation, protect yourself. It's sad that we're in this place of being so flooded, but we are here and authors need to beware. But you never need to beware of the Memoir Nation podcast. And please let us flood your podcasting stream because we feel like we've got a lot of good advice to impart and we have wonderful guests every week. So keep listening, listeners. We really appreciate it. You are the creative fuel we need. Thank you so much.